In today's episode, we are talking about something that I am pretty sure most, if not all, podcasters have felt at some point in their journey. That pesky little thing we know as imposter syndrome. Welcome to Podcasting Tips and Tricks with Lyndal Harris, a show sharing quick, actionable tips, tricks and advice to help you on your podcasting journey. Hello and welcome to another episode of Podcasting Tips and Tricks. I'm your host, Lyndal Harris, and this show is brought to you by Podcast VA, where we help to make the podcasting journey easier by offering done-for-you support services as well as training. I also want to tell you about my Facebook group for podcasters called the Australian Podcasters Collaborative. It is a group for new podcasters or people who are thinking about launching a show, right through to seasoned podcasters. And it is a place for you to connect, learn and share as you go along the journey. So if you are a Facebook user, I would love for you to jump over there and join. It's called the Australian Podcasters Collaborative, but we have also been accepting people from overseas as well now. Now, today's episode is one that I think will resonate with so many people, and certainly it is present with a lot of podcasters, and that is imposter syndrome. I speak to a lot of podcasters, people who are thinking about launching a podcast, and imposter syndrome can literally stop people in their tracks from launching or launching sooner. So today's guest is Fiona Redding. Fiona is the founder of The Happiness Hunter. She's a mindset coach, speaker and facilitator, and she works with her clients and community to help them navigate life and transform their approach to business with inspiring and practical strategies, tools and insights to teach them how to shift their mindset and achieve life integration. She is the co-host of the Business Addicts Podcast and has published a book on meditation called The Happiness Hunter's Guide to Meditation. Her mission in life is to share everything that she has learned and is continuing to learn about turning her own life around and creating and growing a fulfilling, successful and profitable business, and to help you understand that happiness is to be found in the overcoming of obstacles and challenges in your life and not actually in the absence of them. She's been studying metaphysics under Grandmaster Dr. Issam Kadamani at the International College of Meditation and Healing for the last 5 years. And excitingly, she is actually launching her own Happiness Hunter podcast next week, in the next week or two. Now, I actually heard about Fiona through the Business Addicts Podcast because I was a business addict, or I am a business addict, and that she co-hosts with Lauren Bartley. And I can remember meeting you in person at ProBlogger, Fiona, and I think, oh gosh, that must be maybe 4 years ago now. And I just instantly felt a connection with you. So we've stayed connected online. We see each other at events every now and then. So it is awesome to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thanks, Lyndal. Thanks for having me here. I remember when we met and I was at that conference, complete imposter.
Yeah, me too, actually. Oh my gosh. Yep. Let's just start that right in there. I had that too. It's so funny, isn't it?
It's like, what am I doing here? No, I don't deserve to be here. I'm not doing the podcast. Lauren's doing all the podcast. I'm just the host.
That's so funny. That is so funny. Well, do you want to start by telling everybody a little bit about yourself and the Happiness Hunter?
Okay. So I started my business, The Happiness Hunter, in 2013. But I'd sort of done a couple of other things before it became The Happiness Hunter. And I'd started my own business because I tried to return to work after having kids and hadn't been able to return in any meaningful part-time capacity. So I was like, I need to work out how I can translate my skill set to self-employment. And so I wrote down a list and decided I could do business consulting on paper. But actually the reality of that has actually been the process of the last few years. So I stopped drinking in 2013, and then 2 weeks later I left my kid's dad, and we basically, we didn't have anywhere to live. I had a startup business with one client, and I started to meditate and understand that I'd kind of created my own reality through my own thinking. And I met Dr. Issam Katamani, who you mentioned in the introduction, I met him about 5 years ago and started working on myself to turn my own life around. And in the process of that, actually, my business evolved into working with my clients on their mindset and sharing what I was learning and how they could actually apply and implement those things in their own lives as well.
That's amazing. That's really exciting, isn't it? How you've taken your own personal journey and been able to really put that into the business that you're now doing. And I'm sure the Happiness Hunter podcast is going to share a lot more about that. So if we sort of jump into or step back to the beginning to talk about imposter syndrome, and we both laughed a moment ago because we've both very much felt it before. What is imposter syndrome?
So imposter syndrome was first discovered or documented in the 70s. And there was a woman, I think she was a professor of psychology at a university in the States, I think. And what she found was there were these highly accomplished, talented, smart, high-performing women, particularly the women, who just couldn't see how successful they were, how incredible they were. They'd say things like, I'm going to flunk this test. They just didn't believe in themselves. Anyway, so she started doing a little bit more research about it. And so she spoke to and did some research with a number of the women in the course and discovered that they thought it was more common for women, since success for women is determined sort of by societal expectations and their own internalized self-evaluation. So that was basically when the concept of imposter syndrome was first kind of discussed. And then over the years and more recently, they've actually discovered that it actually affects everyone, and it's probably not even a syndrome. It's actually just a thing that we experience, and we call it the imposter syndrome. But most people experience it in some way at some point in their life.
Yeah, I had read something that a crazy high stat, something like 70% or 75% of people, not suffer from it, but feel it at some point in their life. And so I guess that's true. And it probably, you're right, everybody probably feels it, but not necessarily to the point where they talk about it. And I know when I talk to potential podcasting clients and podcasters, it's much more prevalent in women than it is in men. And I don't know if that is because imposter syndrome is, or just because maybe women talk about it a little bit more. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that's definitely right. I think women talk about it more. And so I guess a really good explanation of it is about high achieving individuals who cannot internalize their accomplishments, and they just have this persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud. So women are much more likely to talk about that than men would be.
Yeah.
As a general rule, I would say.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, isn't it? It's not like a diagnosable mental health issue or syndrome, as you say, but it can be quite debilitating as far as people putting themselves out there, because they've got such a fear of putting themselves out there. And I wonder, I don't know, I haven't seen any stats, but I wonder how much of that now is true because of the different society that we live in, where people are putting themselves out there more and being criticized more. I mean, you just got to look at social media and, someone can say something and other people will jump in and tear them down. So, that's not going to help with people's fear of putting themselves out there and feeling fraudulent, I guess.
But I think with what happens with that stuff, it just reinforces an existing belief system. So if you don't have that belief system, you're not affected by those things. If you do have those belief systems or that belief system, it will affect you. So it's that idea of, so some of the things around the dialogue we might have around the imposter syndrome is about comparing ourselves, but we're not equal to them. So we'd look around us and say, oh, that person's got much more knowledge than me, or they've been doing it for longer, and I can't compete with that. Or feeling like your success is due to luck. So it only happened because I had a lucky break. It was nothing to do with my hard work or anything. When you feel uncomfortable describing your achievements. So, and sometimes when people say to you, you did a really good job on that, and you go, oh, no, don't worry about that.
Yes, yeah. Not good at receiving compliments.
Yeah. But not only not receiving them, deflecting them. Mm-hmm. So there's no ability to internalize what input and information is coming to you, because you think that person has to be wrong because it doesn't reflect your internal dialogue.
Yeah, right.
Feeling not deserving, worthy, smart enough, haven't earned your stripes. Doesn't matter how many qualifications you've got. Doesn't matter how many years of experience you've got. Doesn't matter how many testimonials you've got. Nah, still haven't kind of earned this. I'm going to get found out. They're going to know. They'll find out. And I was reading about, Maya Angelou.
Yes.
11 books she published. And I mean, I won't go so far as to say she's a household name, but I imagine most of your listeners would know who she is.
Yes. Yep.
Every time she published a book, she would feel like they were going to find her out.
Yeah. Wow.
And it was Jodie Foster, I think, who said that she keeps expecting a phone call to have to hand her Oscar back.
What?
That's the imposter syndrome. Yeah. Got given an Oscar.
I haven't heard that one. That is phenomenal. What?
Yep. Another way it can sort of manifest is, I don't believe this success can last. It's a fluke.
Mm-hmm.
It's only an accident that this great thing has happened. Or you don't actually feel like your success proves anything. So your past successes have no weighting at all.
Wow.
So that's kind of some of the ways that it can actually play out.
Yeah, that's a fairly extensive sort of list there too. When you think about it and you really break it down, there's quite a lot of different ways that it sort of can present itself. Do you? I certainly have a story with imposter syndrome, but I'd like to ask you: Do you have a story about your own imposter syndrome that you can share?
Well, just recently, actually, with launching the Happiness Hunter podcast, it's been a fantastic opportunity for it to completely show itself in all of its glory. And even as a mindset coach, like, I know this stuff, but I'm like in the trenches as well. Like, and I think that's a big part of me for actually feeling like an imposter, because I haven't overcome all of this stuff yet. Like, I still have a lot of the challenges with my mindset, even though I help my clients. So I go, oh, well, I haven't, overcome everything yet. So who am I to help anyone else? Yeah. And so launching this podcast on mindset for me has been huge, because I'm like, who am I to be doing this show? And people keep saying to me, when are you going to do a podcast? You'd be really good at a podcast. You've been doing the Business Addicts Podcast for the last 5 years. Why don't you do your own podcast? I'm like, I don't really have anything probably useful to say. I don't know what I'd do topics on, what episodes on. I don't have this technical knowledge, because Lauren did all of that for the last podcast. I don't have the time. Nobody's going to want to listen to it. What if it's really crap and people think it's bad? So I've had to, and another thing that really showed up for me was that I didn't think I was smart enough.
Where did that come from? Yeah.
But this is what happens. It's like this stuff comes up that has no basis of any reality, but we believe it to be true.
It's like that little voice in your head, isn't it? How are you feeling about the launch of the Happiness Hunter podcast? Are you feeling that imposter syndrome now, or have you sort of worked through that, or how's that going? I think I've actually worked, I'm not even going to say think, I have actually worked through it, because this is not the first time I've done something that's really pushing me outside of my comfort zone. When I wrote the Happiness Hunter's Guide to Meditation,
I didn't think I could do that on my own. I actually got a book writing coach to help me. I could have done that, and I will be able to write the next book on my own, but I didn't have the belief in myself to do it. So then I published this book feeling like it's not my book and I didn't do it.
Oh, wow.
It was like, yeah. And even with when we started the Business Addicts Podcast, it was crippling to do that as well.
Yeah.
But I think the more we do these things, the more we start to see the lack of any substance to that thinking and the lack of any reality, and we can keep reminding ourselves that those voices that we're hearing aren't actually the truth.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's such an important message, isn't it? Because we can let it play over and over and over in our head. And look, I certainly have had a lot of imposter syndrome, not only around launching this podcast, but also just working in the podcasting industry. There are so many people that I look up to here in the Australian podcasting industry, as well as internationally. And I just had this niggly voice, like in the back of my head, like, who are you to talk about that, or why are you to talk about that? And especially because, a lot of people know that when Simon was sick and I just could not launch a podcast. And 3 years ago, from the very beginning of coming into this industry, I'm like trying to build my personal brand here and trying to build my business, but I don't have a podcast. So I had this constant, negative talk at me saying, who are you to talk about podcasting in the podcasting industry when you don't have a podcast? And yet I'd successfully launched a whole lot of clients. We were managing their ongoing episodes. I knew what I was talking about when it came to podcasting. I just didn't believe in myself. And I would talk people through their own feelings of imposter syndrome when they would have their podcast consult with me. I'd be like, don't worry about it. Like you've just got to push through it. And I love that title of that book, like Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. Is it Susan Jeffers? And I think with imposter syndrome, for me, certainly that has been a lot of what I've just had to do to push through it, because I very much had why would somebody listen to my podcast about podcasting when there's so many others out there? And why would somebody come to me for training when there are so many other courses out there? And I think something that someone said to me, and I used to say to people, but it really sort of hit home when someone said it to me, was like, but I want to hear from you. And that's how I feel about your podcast, Fiona, because I'm probably one of those people that has been saying to you for ages, are you going to do a podcast? Because I think the Happiness Hunter podcast would be amazing. And I want to hear from you because I know you and I know that your audience want to hear from you. They don't want to go and listen to somebody else talking about it. And I think everybody can get their own, some people resonate with you and others won't, and that's okay. But it's remembering that people want to hear from you.
And I think also with that, like, who are we not to? Like, who's telling us we can't do this stuff? No one. Like, there's no rules. There's no maps. There's no you're allowed to do this and you're not allowed to do that. Like, we can do whatever we want. We can become whoever we want. And we let this nonsense about not being good enough or worthy enough or smart enough stop us. Like, who are we not to do that? And there is, like you say, there's people out there that are really genuinely interested in listening to what we've got to say. Yeah. I have a value right now, just as I am, with the knowledge and the experience that I've got. I don't have to be the expert. I don't have to be the guru. I don't have to be the person that knows everything about every single thing that's ever been talked about mindset in the history of the world. I just need to show up and go, this is what I know, and I hope it's of use, and I hope it's helpful for you. And one of the things I think I really had to do with this podcast, and I actually said it on my first episode, was I'm creating this podcast for you. I'm not creating it for the people that are never going to listen.
Yep. Yes.
Because so much of the time we're like, oh, but that person in my mind that I'm thinking about, and I'm trying to adjust what I'm saying and modify what I'm saying or whatever, in case they don't like it or they don't agree with it. not making it for them.
That's exactly right. And they're not going to listen. Exactly what you say. Like, they might listen to one and they might not listen again. And that's okay, because you don't want people, well, you wouldn't listen to something that you didn't like either. And I think it's great that you touched on, I know for me, certainly that whole comparisonitis. I've just, I have unfollowed people in the same industry and what have you, my competitors, because I just don't want that negative feeling of comparisonitis. And I know that sometimes, I do suffer from that. So I try not to look at them like not earning your stripes and things like that. So I just find that list that you went through before really quite fascinating when you think about why are we letting why are we letting what we think other people think, govern how we feel? And that's just
because that's exactly it. We don't even know what we're thinking ourselves, yet we're the expert on what everybody else is thinking and how they're thinking and why they're thinking it. Oh, yeah, I know what she's thinking. No, you don't.
Yeah.
You don't.
Oh, my gosh, that's just so it's bizarre, isn't it? When you think that you know what they're thinking, then you start going into this crazy whirlpool of thoughts that are all negative. And
even, so you say you unfollow someone, right? Because for you, it's just like, it makes me feel bad seeing their success or seeing what they're doing, and that I'm going to be feeling like I'm copying them or something like that, because I can really relate to that as well. But they might be thinking, she hates me. She thinks I'm really bad at what I do. Like, the same event, we can see it from completely different angles.
Yep.
So we just need to retrain ourselves to see ourselves in a more loving light, and to really appreciate our strengths and what we're good at, and just to not focus on all of this stuff that's stopping us from moving forward, because we're not doing anyone any service by playing small.
That's exactly right.
Now, by doing what we're doing, so you're going out, you're telling the world, you should start a podcast, and this is how you can do it. This is how I'm doing it. You can go and listen to 50 million other people and find out how they do it. But if you're interested in hearing how I do it, you can listen to my podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's not hard. It's so.
And if you don't like the sound of my voice, that's okay. You don't have to listen ever again.
I love that you brought that up, because podcasters never like the sound of their own voice. That's a great one. Or, to start with, they don't like the sound of their own voice, or that's something that they have in their head too. But
nobody does. And this is the thing. And we go, even though the whole world is hearing our voice the whole time, we're not. But everybody else can hear our voice the whole time. But we can't record it.
We can't record it. That's right.
Because people might know what we sound like.
Oh, that's so true. That's so funny. And I think for me, like, something that I always sort of take on board too is different people feel differently about things. I know with Simon, he couldn't care less what people thought. It was like water off a duck's back for him. And so it was this completely different thing for he and I, because he'd just be like, who cares? Like, just what are you even bothered by it for? And for me, I'm a real empath. So I would take on all the feelings and the emotional feeling of it all and be like, oh, but I feel so guilty about doing that, or I feel really bad about doing this, or how's that person going to feel about this? Whereas different people react differently to things. So some people really have that feeling side of things, or they overthink things, and then others are just like, that's cool. If that's what, that's what you think, then that's okay, because I don't really care. And there were times when I'd just be like, oh, yeah, I'd love to have a little bit more of that thick skin, I think. But it's just not me.
I think, no, and that's where, having that self-awareness about our personality type and how we think and feel, but also recognizing you feeling like that is your choice. It's nothing to do with anybody else. So you've decided through your own program, belief system, thought processes to create meaning from that situation or those circumstances. Whereas for him, doesn't have that program. He's like, I don't understand what you're talking about. Like, why would you care what other people think? And, maybe that goes a little bit back more to the women and the men thing as well.
Yeah.
But there was a woman called Valerie Young, and she wrote a book called The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women, Why Capable People Suffer from the Imposter Syndrome and How to Thrive in Spite of It. Very good
Yeah.
tagline. I'm sure that's got good SEO or something in it. But anyway, she identified 5 types of imposter. So I'll quickly run through these. So the first one is, I don't actually think it's in an order, but the perfectionist, who basically says, I should have done better, mistakes are unacceptable, and I just could have done that better. So this is after the event, but also probably preventing them before the event because things need to be perfect. And if it's not going to be perfect, I can't possibly do it, because if it's not going to be perfect, everyone's going to die.
Yeah, which a small caveat there is that if you want to launch a podcast, don't wait for it to be perfect. Just get it out there and start learning on the way.
Release and refine as you go.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So then we've got the expert. So if I was naturally smart, I'd know everything there is to know. So they feel completely unqualified. Then we've got the natural genius. If I were really smart, this would be effortless. So basically they have to work for it, or they have to work hard, then they're no good. Like it should be easy.
Yep.
The superhero, if I were really competent, I'd be able to do it all, and they just feel completely undeserving. And then there's the individualist. The only achievements that really matter are the ones I got myself. So any task that's had a helping hand is not really achieved at all. And it's so interesting because I'm all of them.
I was going to say, I think I could maybe cross a few of those off, if not all of them.
I know. So, but this is what we've got to do and catch ourselves when we're in the imposter syndrome, is actually going, this is a thing that people experience. And I just have to accept that's what's going on for me right now. It's not real. It has no basis or reflection of anything in any reality.
Yeah, I love that.
So what do I need to do to move forward?
Could almost stick that up on the wall, really. It's not real. It's not real. It's so true. It's not real. Gosh, well, moving on from that, I would actually love to ask you, like, what are your top tips for overcoming, or, even if it's not overcoming it, maybe silencing it or growing more resistance to this imposter syndrome?
I think the first thing we need to do is acknowledge it, like when we get the awareness of it, and talk to someone about it, because that voice goes round and round and round, and then it grows legs and has babies, and it becomes this massive thing in your head. And you start, because of the way we perceive our reality. So it's through our thinking. Our thinking creates our reality. Our thinking creates an emotional state within us. So if I'm having thoughts about being unqualified, hopeless, dumb, who am I to be doing this, and those thoughts take over, then I'm going to start seeing things around me to support that way of thinking. I'm going to experience more of life from that perspective. Mm-hmm. So what we need to do, we need to acknowledge it, talk to people about it, but then we actually need to say, okay, well, this is where I am. This is what's going on. What's the flip of this? So if I'm feeling like I'm not smart, I need to start visualizing and affirming success. I need to start looking at what I actually really want and creating that new reality in my mind.
Yeah.
So we start looking from an aspect of lack. So we stop looking from an aspect of lack and more into that aspect of expansion and abundance, because that's going to help us push through and move through. And what's been fascinating through this process with the Happiness Hunter podcast, it's clearing so much stuff because I'm moving through it properly. When I was doing the Happiness Hunter book, I didn't talk to anybody about it. I just felt like such a dismal failure. It was awful. I just felt so bad about myself, about the process, about the book. Now, this is a book, by the way, The Happiness Hunter's Guide to Meditation, which really is a good book, and it really helps people. People message me and they go, I'm reading your book for the 3rd time. Or they'll message me and they'll say, I'm going through a really hard time at the moment and your book's really helping me. But no, I'm still a failure.
Yeah.
So I didn't want that to play out again with this podcast. And I think that fear of that playing out again has delayed me doing this podcast. And it's crazy. It doesn't need to be like that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think, gosh, if we keep reminding ourselves of what, listen to the people who say, I want to listen to you. Like, you think about when you're in that negative headspace and you've got those voices talking to you, maybe that's when you really like sit down and really start, hold on a sec, I'm just going to stop this and just remember the stuff that people have said. They want to listen to my podcast. They want to hear my podcast. They're asking me to launch a podcast, remembering the positive feedback of how many times they've read your book and how many times that's helped them, and trying to make that drown out the sound of the imposter syndrome is possibly, that's something that I certainly did. I just kept trying to remind myself of a lot of the positive feedback I'd been given.
Yeah, and I think particularly with podcasting, this audience is people who want to podcast. Just do it. It's such an amazing medium. Like, I know with the Business Addicts Podcast, we've had huge amounts of work leads come through that. It really helped with relationships that I've got with people, with expanding my networks, with growing knowledge, so many benefits from it. And I'm so excited about what's going to open up through the platform I'm building now with the Happiness Hunter, with all of that knowledge and understanding and knowing how much I have something of value that is going to help people or interest people or entertain people. It doesn't matter if it's not perfect. It doesn't matter if it's not exactly right. Like, what's perfect anyway?
That's exactly. Oh gosh,
Who
exactly.
sets the bar on perfect?
What's normal? Like, I always laugh and just go, well, what is normal? Because normal doesn't have any boundaries either. Really, it's different to everybody. And I think you're so right. And I think the thing with podcasting is, if you feel like you really, really want to do it and you feel like it's really going to work for you, then try it, because the worst that could happen is that it doesn't work for you or you don't like doing it. And you can stop. Not that I am encouraging anybody to start and then stop at all, because I think there is a long game that people need to play to make podcasting work and everything. But what I'm trying to say is you can conquer that imposter syndrome, I think, in this sort of sense of it, by knowing if you really can't beat it and you really hate the podcasting journey, you're not tied into it for life. So I guess that's probably something that you could, as I say, I certainly don't want people to start and stop, but if you have that in your mind, it might just be enough to get you over the line to start. And then you're like, oh, hold on a sec, actually, this is quite cool. I've conquered it, or I'm feeling better about it.
You know what they say, like, this is what my teacher, Dr. Hassan, says, baby steps will get you there. So just start. Have an idea about what you want, like have a vision, have a bit of a plan, but don't go to step 25 when you haven't even got step 1. Like, just start at step 1. And I think that's something that's really helped me with the process of launching this podcast. And I actually made a very conscious decision that I was going to do every step of the launch, because I wanted to understand it. So my personality is, I'm a big picture, jack of all trades, master of none. I'm very good at starting things. I'm not very good at finishing things. And I just wanted this podcast to be an example to myself that I don't have to be that. I can change and I can actually do the things that aren't perhaps not my greatest strengths. And it's not saying I have to do it forever, but I do need to know what elements of this I need to do myself and what elements of this can be outsourced. And I'm only going to know that by doing it. But the learning curve has built my confidence, because it's like, I can totally do this. Whereas before I was like, I'm not technical, I'm not a marketer, I'm not this, I'm not that, I can't possibly do it. All of that stuff's been knocked out this time in this process. And that's the difference between what I've done now with this and what I did with the book. I could have done that book on myself, but I didn't believe that I could. So then that created a whole lot of other stuff for me to beat myself up about.
It's and look, when you think about starting a podcast, and again, it's like a lot of people that I speak to, when you think about starting a podcast, it's like, oh my gosh, it is a mountain. Like how, oh my God, what people will start with, like, what microphone do I even use? Like, how would I even get it onto Apple Podcasts and Spotify? I wouldn't have a clue. Not that's too hard. Well, I'm not going to do a podcast because I just don't think I can do it. Whereas if, as you said, that perfect example is like, find something, like whether it's a resource or whatever, or a training program or whatever it is, that's going to step you through it, and just one step at a time. Because actually podcasting, once you get into it, it's not this big, massive, scary, hard, impossible thing at all. But it's something that you do want to break down step by step so that you can get through each of those steps and continue with it, or launch and continue with it. So yeah, that's a great advice there.
And I think also with that as well is the process is actually very straightforward. And there is so much software, graphic design stuff. There's so much stuff that's actually free or very low cost. Like the barriers to entry for creating a podcast are probably the lowest for anything really that you could do. And one of the things I've found so incredible, and it's always been a really big thing for me since the Business Addicts, is the podcasting community, and how amazingly supportive and willing to share their knowledge and failures and the things that have worked well and how they're trying to do things. That's been a huge help. And your Facebook group, Lyndal, is probably my favourite. And I know you've got some fantastic resources that I've used as well, which I'd really encourage any of your listeners who are thinking about starting a podcast to check out Lyndal's resources and join the Facebook group, because having a community of people like your cheerleaders who are in the trenches doing it with you is so inspiring, and it's actually really fun. It's making this process fun.
Oh, thank you. That's great feedback, because I do love the Facebook group. I love that it's everyone is just so encouraging. There's never any negativity in there. People can ask questions. Sometimes people will come to me and ask me questions personally, and I'm happy to answer them. But I'm also like, hey, why don't you put that in the group and ask? Because you're going to get a whole lot of different perspectives, and possibly that's going to help you more than just my perspective on it. So it is engaged and encouraging, and I'm a little bit biased. I do love my Facebook group a lot.
You've got to remember, you created that. Like that community, that culture has come from you. So you should be really proud of yourself for that, because and you nurture it and you care for it and you help it grow. And that's what podcasting is to work with your community in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, coming back to that, do you have any more tips for overcoming or conquering it, or shall we move along to another question?
All right, look, I just think breathe and just check in with yourself and just go, I need to talk to someone about this. Like, don't have that going round and round in your head. That would be my number one piece of advice about that.
It's so true. It's so true. I know I can say, like, categorically, I've had a big life event happen to me, or I've had quite a few actually, but I've had that big life event of losing someone very close. And so that changed my whole perspective on things. So I might have had imposter syndrome about this and that and what have you in the past. But, oh my gosh, I tell you, it takes something like that to just go, oh, if I really strip it all back, like, who cares? Like, that sounds really but seriously, like, if it doesn't work, it's okay. It's not going to ruin anybody's world or life or anything like that. And sometimes I have to sort of talk myself down to that too, and just go, it doesn't matter. Like, I can get myself so, my head can be going at a million miles an hour, and I often do talk to people, but it can, really be a case of like just saying to myself, it doesn't matter, Lyndal, just remember that in the big scheme of life, what matters is my family and my children and all of that kind of stuff. And if I say something on a podcast that offends people, or I say the wrong thing because they do it differently or whatever, it actually doesn't matter. So, I think that.
No, that is so true. And really keeping in mind, and this is, what I teach as well, like, what's the purpose of your life? Why are you here? You're here to learn and grow, to be a good person, to try new things, to fail, to fall down, to get back up again. I just sort of think, at the end of the day, I want to be able to put my head on the pillow and think I did the best I could. And I want to feel like that at the end of my life as well. And so if I get the idea to do something, it's very important that idea has come from somewhere to follow through on that, because I don't want to live with regret.
That is very true. Yes, as I say, I've been through the journey with Simon and cancer, and knowing what it's like when he knew that at the end of his life was coming. And it's so true. And when you strip it back to things like you're running a business, it's so easy to think, right, that's working for them, and that's working, and that's working, and I should do this, I should do an online course, I should do a podcast, I should do this, and you can get yourself in such a tangle. And it's like, well, it doesn't matter if it doesn't happen this year. It doesn't matter if it takes 6 to 12 months until I do it, if that's the goal that I want to do. And so I totally agree with you there. Putting your head down on your pillow at night and knowing that you haven't got any regrets, that's the main thing. And that can help you maybe with that decision of the imposter
pushing
syndrome.
On through.
Yep, absolutely. So I am going to ask you now. I actually have a couple of questions that I ask at the end of every interview. And one of them is, and this is going to be an interesting one for you, because you can take it back to Business Addicts, or you can tell us your opinion from the Happiness Hunter podcast. But what is it that you wish you knew when you started podcasting?
How much fun it was going to be, how much it opened up things. And I think I probably would have allowed myself to enjoy the process a little bit more with Business Addicts at the start. Like, it was very exciting, but I just felt like, who was I to be talking to these people? Because it was 100% interview process for that podcast.
Yep.
I just felt like I didn't belong, and I did belong because I was doing a podcast. So I'm really trying to take that to what I'm doing with the Happiness Hunter podcast. It's like, I belong doing this. This is my podcast. So I think that would be it, owning it.
Yeah, so true, isn't it? Owning it. I love it. What is your number one tip about podcasting, whether it's starting or whether it's the sort of ongoing part of it?
I think consistency is really important, but active listening.
Oh, yes, that's so true.
Because it's a podcast and people are listening to it. And often when you've got a guest on, yes, just like thinking ahead to the next question, but actually just allowing yourself to be fully present to the actual communication that's happening right now. And then the next step, we'll get to that. The conversation will more naturally flow. So I think that's active listening.
I think there too, you can always have questions scripted out or whatever, but just be flexible enough to go on a journey if it takes a turn. Like, so I love that. And I'm just going to, I haven't heard that advice before, and I actually really, really love it. And I think if you're listening from a podcaster's perspective, just remember that if active listening takes you off, what your outline is or whatever, you can edit, because you can stop and find your place again. And that's okay, because you can edit that back together. So don't stop that from letting the flow happen if it's going off course, because you can always come back on course that way.
Pat Flynn actually said that.
Oh, did he?
I was watching a video with him the other day, actually, and he was just saying, don't feel like you've got to do it all in one take.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Because you can. I mean, we could
be
saying here in this conversation, we're going, hold on a sec, I've forgotten what I'm just going to say here. So let's just stop for a sec. You can do all of that in your recording, and it's not, it's
because you've got to edit it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that is a great tip, actually. I love it. Active listening. So can you share with our listeners the best place for them to find you, and obviously maybe a little bit more about your podcast launch?
So the best place to get in touch with me is probably through the webs, or find out a bit more about the Happiness Hunter, thehappinesshunter.com. And my podcast is scheduled to be released next Wednesday.
So that's Wednesday the 12th or 13th? 12th. Excellent. And I will have links in the show notes to Fiona's website. I'll also pop a link into your book, the Guide for Meditation. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It has been so good to chat to you. I know we've spoken many, many times, but it is so good to talk to you about I just love the whole imposter syndrome thing. I hate it, but I love that everybody feels it. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your info with us.
Well, thank you for having me, Lyndal.
I absolutely loved that chat with Fiona. It just is so true that so many people have experience with imposter syndrome. Anyway, I hope you have a great week and I will speak to you next time. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you subscribe in your podcatcher so you don't miss an episode. And whilst you're there, I'd love it if you'd leave me a rating and review to help other podcasters.